these folks are kind of on the cutting edge of ministry, made me realize that this was a total rewrite, and much of it had to do about these conflicting kind of perceptions of the church. So, attraction assumptions, next slide. The original book has quotes like, laity and pastors take the initiative to invite, welcome, include, and support newcomers. That's in the Radical Hospitality chapter. Next slide. They demonstrated active desire to invite, welcome, receive, and care for those who are strangers. Now, do you see the attractional assumptions that rest behind that? It assumes that, out there in society, there are folks who are just waiting to come barge through our doors on Sunday morning and join us in doing the things we do and liking the things we like and singing the songs we sing, and that all we have to do is be friendly to them when they arrive. And how's that working these days? In the years since the original book, fruitful congregations have discovered that while attractional models are helpful and necessary to fulfill the mission of Christ, they simply are not enough. Faith communities must also develop ministries that derive from missional assumptions, activities that primarily benefit people who are not members of the church, often in places far away from the church facilities. And these ministries require a different posture toward our neighbors, a more deliberate outward focus, and a willingness to carry Christ's love to where people actually live, work, and play, rather than waiting for people to come to us. Hospitality doesn't stop with merely inviting people to come to our churches and then being friendly with them when they arrive. It's kind of like radical hospitality if it's just being practiced in a very perfunctory way on Sunday morning as part of our volunteer service for an hour. It really doesn't mean anything if we're not even developing relationships with our neighbors, with the people who live across the street from us and beside us, and who work and live and play with us all the time. And then other unhealthy expectations that leadership means control. What it means to be elected to this position of responsibility is to have control of everything, instead of to multiply the witness and ministry of the church. And there's some maturity that's required to realize that leadership is not controlling everything, but rather making things happen, which means letting go, which means giving people permission, which means getting out of the way sometimes. But the story is told that a university somewhere was troubled by the fact that even though they had all these fine sidewalks worked out, people were constantly cutting across the lawn and through the green areas and just creating these trails, right? And so when they were developing another part of the campus, they built the new buildings. They started using those buildings, but they put off building the sidewalks until the buildings were used somewhat, and then they looked where the trails were and they built the sidewalks over the trails, right? Now, did it ever actually happen? I don't know, but I love the illustration because what that is it's a kind of guidance for us about how we organize our churches. If you have this committee, this committee, this committee, and you're having a hard time getting people to serve on them, and when they do serve on them, the committee doesn't do much except that report, rehash, redo kind of work, and people are frustrated at it, and attendance is low. Maybe what you need to look around and say, so what are the ministries that are just really taking off here? And if your church is one of those that is developing something like a emergency response team ministry, and you've got a dozen folks who are deeply involved with that and committed to that, maybe instead of saying they need to report to this committee, and this committee, instead, how do you build a sidewalk? How do you build some accountability structure that supports and encourages and multiplies that ministry?
John Wesley wrote the covenant prayer. Especially when we pray it on New Year's, sometimes the words, we speak them as if they're aspirational, full of resolve. We pray it aloud together with the energy of repeating the Pledge of Allegiance with an air of triumph or determination rather than of humility. This way of praying the covenant prayer misses the utter, intense vulnerability in the words. The prayer is a confession that we are not in control. We don't know what's next, and so we surrender ourselves in complete humility to God. The prayer isn't for when we are riding high and full of confidence, but when we are feeling helpless and unsure. The covenant prayer for those who don't have all the answers. Despite our brokenness and failure and confusion, the prayer reminds us that there is a direction, a purpose, and a mission large and grand enough to submit our lives to. The covenant prayer invites complete humility and obedience to God, asking God to work through us or around us, to take us to places and put us alongside people we would never choose if left to our own inclinations. Repeating the prayer in humility, we rededicate ourselves to Christ and reaffirm our willingness to adapt our lives to the mission field.